I want you to imagine that there's a line across the front of this church, starting at that end, right against that wall, with a youth ministry that is in the church's name, probably paid for by the PCC, but actually totally separate from the rest of the church. Adults and young people rarely mix. The youth leaders and the clergy kind of bump into each other now and again. That's right down that end. Right at this end of the line is a youth ministry that feels really integrated into the life of the church. Adults and young people not only talk together, they actually minister alongside each other. Youth leaders and church leadership feel like a team. It's a kind of cohesive community. So across that line, from no integration to total integration, just imagine if I were to say, and I'm not going to, get up and stand somewhere on that line to imagine where your church is. Just imagine where you'd be standing. Now, at one level, I don't care where you're imagining that place to be, all right? Because it's a subjective exercise, not a scientific one. But what I hope to do in the next few minutes is to convince you that it is worth moving in that direction and another step or two that way. And prompt you to think about what you are actually going to do to help move the youth work in your church in that direction into a more integrated phase. And the first exhibit I have for you is this. It's a Valentine's card, the symbol of loving relationships, okay? If you are a youth leader, how good is your relationship with your vicar or your church leader, whatever they're called? If you are a church leader or a vicar, how good is your relationship with your youth leader? Sometimes those relationships are really great. They're creative, they're accountable. Sometimes they're not. And I guess what I'm asking you to do, not for the sake of that relationship, but for the sake of the young people and their spiritual welfare, is to work on that relationship. You may be completely different ages, different personalities, have totally different ideas, but God has brought you together. So work on what that means. Now, I think that close relationships between vicars and those who oversee youth ministry are so important that I actually slept with the person who oversaw youth ministry in 2 of the 3 churches that I've led. This Valentine's card was from her to me, and I kept it and treasured it. I happen to be married to the lady involved, and have been for 33 years, so you don't have to go and write to the bishop. But I do have an understanding of how that close relationship can really benefit the work, because I've kind of been there. If that relationship is good, you will be able to work creatively. You'll be able to disagree with each other well. Sounds like a marriage, this, doesn't it? And you'll be able to come to better decisions because you're both involved in them. And like most relationships, it will work best if you focus on the things that you can do to make it better, not the things the other person ought to be doing to make it better. St. Paul helps us out with that when he writes in Philippians, "Do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. Rather, in humility, value others above yourselves, not looking to your own interests, but each of you to the interests of others." So pursue that humility in your relationships, honouring and respecting your vicar or your youth leader, whichever way around it is. Then when the difficult situations happen, and they will, you can present a unified front that actually glorifies God. So, a Valentine's card to encourage you to work hard at those relationships between church leaders, clergy, and youth leaders. Indeed, even to love each other. Second thing I want to show you is a nut and bolt. Nice big nut and bolt for you. Youth work is sometimes treated in the same way as evangelism, another of my passions, and it's kind of bolted on to the side of church. And we do a bit of youth work and we'll stick it on along the side. And if you don't have a good creative relationship with your church leadership, then that's the kind of thing that can happen. Some youth workers love it that way because it leaves them with lots of freedom to do whatever they want and lots of opportunity to moan that the church doesn't care and doesn't get involved. Some church members love it like that because it keeps these young people out of sight and out of mind, and we can get on with what we want to do. But I think long term it is really unhelpful because it fails to integrate young people into the family life of the church, and when they reach adulthood, it can be really difficult for them to re-engage when the youth work stuff ends. I used to help oversee a youth church that was shared between 3 local churches, and all the over 16s from our churches fed our young people into this youth church. After a few years, we pulled out of that venture. Not because the youth church wasn't excellent or thriving, it was both things, but because our kids weren't thriving. They quite liked the youth church bit, but when they reached 18 to 19, and the people from the posh parish down the road went off to university, and our lot didn't do that sort of thing, they found it really hard to integrate back into mainstream church. And we lost almost all of them. And what we'd done was create a culture gap instead of removing one. So instead, we brought them back into our normal Sunday worship from the age of 15, and we gave them a chance to serve and use their gifts one Sunday a month. I'm not saying this is the answer for everyone, but the principle I think is important. One Sunday a month, we had something called Service Sunday, and all our over 15-year-olds had ministries. They were on the welcome team, or the sound desk, or the drama team, or the Sunday school creche. They were all doing all kinds of things, not ministering instead of adults, but alongside them as equal partners. And they felt valued, they felt important. They developed relationships with adults outside the youth team. And as a result, not all of them, but a much higher proportion of them, stayed in for the long haul. Now, I'm not saying to you that youth congregations are wrong or unhelpful. I'm a big advocate of fresh expressions. I'm expecting all kinds of different sorts of what church looks like to spring up all over the place. But what I'm saying is, even when you've got all those little different things, you can make them feel part of the whole, part of the mainstream. Don't let them feel like a bolt-on to the edge. So have a look at your youth work and think to yourself how it relates to the rest of the church. Could it be described as youth ministry incorporated? Or is it a contributing, serving part of an intergenerational community? The final thing I want to show you is this. The cross, the sign of blessing that we use at the end of so many of our services, as that symbol of blessing. And it comes with a question. What can the young people of your church do to bless the wider church? If we realize we need better integration, we could just sit there and wait for the adults to cross this divide into youth work where they wrongly think they're not welcome anyway. Or we could say, we're going to do something about that. And I know of nothing that will help us move further along the scale towards integration than adults seeing young people serving alongside them. Whether it's in a painting party to spruce the church hall, or a gardening party to sort the churchyard, or they come back from Soul Survivor and you get them crawling over the pews and laying hands on adults and praying for them. Whatever in your context works to let adults see young people serving, do it. So a Valentine's card, work on your relationships with your leadership. A nut and bolt, do not operate as a bolt-on youth ministry incorporated. Somehow become mainstream. And how can you bless your church? And by cracking youth work next year, if we were to draw that line again, I would love to think lots of us were a step or two further that way. Thank you.